Welcome to a special edition of Off the Page, the show where we talk with Colorado authors to get the story behind the story. I'm Stacy McKenzie, a librarian here at Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library in Broomfield, and today we're talking about Ben Montgomery's book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk. In 1955, 67-year-old Emma Gatewood left her home telling her family she was going for a walk. At the end of that walk, she had completed the 2,050-mile Appalachian Trail. She went on to become the first person, man or woman, to complete that same trail for a second and then a third time. She was quite the celebrity in her day, being the topic of many articles and appearing on several television shows. She was a tremendous woman with an epic journey. Join us now as we listen to Ben Montgomery talk about his book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk.
All right, good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming out tonight. We're very excited about our program. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the Mamie Dowd Eisenhower Public Library's One Book, One Broomfield program. I am Abby Yellman. I've been the director for a whopping total of 5 days, so if I haven't met you yet, I hope to, so please feel free after. Please come up and introduce yourself. I'd love to meet everybody. One Book, One Broomfield. It's a community-wide program that involves contributions from many over the past year. I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge some of the people and community partners that have helped this year's program be possible. I'd like to ask the steering committee members, as I say your name, to stand, and we'll hold our applause till the end and acknowledge you, if that's okay. Broomfield Mayor Randy Ahrens, and he's standing already, he cheated. Jan Kardatsky of the Library Board. Where's Jan? Oh, she's probably still out clicking. Laurel Singleton, Broomfield Library Friends Foundation. Oh, there's Jan, she just waved to me. Carrie Pettis, Broomfield Enterprise Bookwoman columnist. All right. Irene Roberts, community member. There's Irene, alrighty. Roseanne Doran, community member. Jason McKinney, community member and Broomfield Enterprise guest columnist. I just read one of his columns yesterday. It was great. Iva Osborne, community member. Linda Rodriguez, community member. Beverly Thompson, community member. Roberta Depp, retired Director of Library Services and Cultural Affairs. Thank you for letting me stalk you and meet you tonight, Roberta. Gigi Yang, library staff. Gigi's been fabulous. And Elaine Mason, library staff, also very fabulous. There she is. All right, let's give them a round of applause. I'd also like to recognize some community partners that have helped make One Book, One Broomfield possible. Coyote Ridge Books, which some of you might have met Matt out in the lobby. The Broomfield Enterprise, KCCB Channel 8, Broomfield Library Friends Foundation, the Broomfield Open Space and Trails, Broomfield Health and Human Services, Walk to Connect, Omni Resorts at Interlochen, Bobby Osberg, and Bobby, if I pronounce that wrong, come find me after the program. Betty Erickson, Broomfield City Council member and author. Library and Cultural Affairs staff, City and County of Broomfield, and to all the volunteers who assisted with this year's program, thank you very much. Following tonight's author presentation, there will be some time for questions as well as a book signing to follow in the gallery or the lobby right outside the doors. And now I am honored to introduce Mayor Ahrens, who will say a few words and introduce our guest author. Thank you all.
Good job, Abby. I'd like to acknowledge, too, we have Councilmember David Beacom here, and former Mayor Pat Quinn, who's chairman of the Broomfield Open Space Foundation, is here. So I'd like to acknowledge that they're here. I call him number 9. You know, as mayor on behalf of Broomfield, I welcome you to this year's One Book, One Broomfield. I think it's a great tradition that the mayors have been included in this process. I know Years ago, Karen Stewart was actually on the library board and then eventually became mayor, but was very passionate. She's actually the one that spearheaded and helped initiate and start this program. The 2016 selection is Grandma Gatewood's Walk by Ben Montgomery, a true story of Emma Gatewood, a 67-year-old grandmother who in 1955 became the first woman to solo hike the entire length of the Appalachian Trail. And those who read the book realize she did that 3 times, 2,050 miles, if I remember correctly. Grandma Gatewood's outspoken comments about the trail inspired a lasting interest in preserving a trail that spans over 2,000 miles and across 14 states. The book choice is especially appropriate as this year marks the 100th anniversary of the National Park System. And we are fortunate to have Ben here tonight. One of the traditions is we have dinner with the author the night before, and it's kind of nice because you get to know about the author. And when Ben was going through college, he actually aspired to be a cattle rancher. But his wife, Jennifer, didn't like that choice. So he was fortunate to take a class at Arkansas State, if I remember correctly, and he wrote a work, and the teacher told the whole class, "I hope you can all write like Ben." And from there, he's been up for a Pulitzer Prize. So I think it's just amazing, I think I told him last night, in Broomfield, we kind of have an anomaly. We actually have 265 miles of streets that we maintain and 267 miles of trails. Yeah. And I'm pretty happy about that. In fact, one of the things I'm going to leave, Ben, is the passport. Broomfield takes walking our trails pretty seriously. And we came up with a program. We've got a Be Healthy Broomfield. And I want you to take this passport as the token. So Ben Montgomery is a reporter of the Tampa Bay Times, co-founder of the Ogum Chautauqua, a Southern Writers Collective, and a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in 2010. In addition to many other national writing awards, Ben Montgomery's book, Grandma Gatewood's Walk, was a New York Times bestseller. His second book that he was sharing with us last night, The Leper Spy, an unlikely hero of World War II, just came out in October this year. And from the way it sounds, it's going to be just as good, if not better, than this book. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Ben Montgomery. Give me a little token.
Thank you, sir. This is a cup full of green M&Ms. And I was joking with the mayor last night. Abby was going to drive me over, and I said, "All right, so are you a safe driver?" And she said, "Yes, I'm safe, and I have a, what do you drive, a Denali or some huge, yeah." And it has airbags, and I was like, "All right, so all I'll need is green M&Ms." So, first of all, thank you so much, Mayor and Abby and Gigi. Y'all have been wonderful. This is such an honor to be here and to know that more than a half a dozen people read this book. That's very cool. It makes me super excited. And I'll just real quick acknowledge the wife of mine that the mayor referenced, Jennifer, who came with me. And if you know anybody who's ever done a book, Lord have mercy, I feel them. So I just sold the third one, but I've done 2 now. And it really does, in a big way, take a village to raise a book. Because it's not just me. I try to incorporate, I have 3 little kids, and I try to, some would say, pawn off the research. I get them to buy into the book because my parental obligations diminish in a big way when I have to crank out a book in, 12, 13 months. So my wife, I owe dearly for everything I've done. She's a a super trooper. 1955. Nobody in here is old enough to remember 55, I'm sure. Oh, come on. 1955, a woman named Emma Gatewood, who was the mother of 11, the grandmother of 23, the great-grandmother of 2, she told her family that she was going on a walk. And she disappeared. I had no idea where she was for better than 2 months. When she finally let on where she was and what she was doing, it was via postcard, which she dropped in the mail at Roanoke, Virginia, to her kids back home in southeastern Ohio, a little county called Gallipolis. And she said, by walk, I mean I am attempting to solo through hike the Appalachian Trail. 2,050 miles. Runs from, at that time, Mount Oglethorpe in North Georgia to Mount Katahdin in Maine, one of the first mountains that is kissed by the sunlight rising in the east each morning. Her kids, they weren't necessarily surprised. They weren't worried. Imagine your own children not being in contact for this length of time, for 2 months. I talk to my mother about 3 times a week just to make sure everything's okay, and she's in her mid-60s. Imagine you're 67 years old and you disappear for 2.5 months and your kids don't really know where you are. Well, her kids didn't really worry because they knew that their mother was something special, let's say. She was hardy, she was independent, she knew how to get by in the world. They weren't necessarily concerned about her whereabouts. They didn't necessarily know what the Appalachian Trail was. It was a very little known thing in 1955. In fact, Emma Gatewood had first come across the idea that there was an Appalachian Trail from Georgia to Maine in 1949. She read about it in the pages of the National Geographic. And I saw this story. I pulled it out of the archives. And it turns out the National Geographic created this very, let's say, roseate picture of the Appalachian Trail. It said, anyone in moderate physical condition can hayfoot, strawfoot from Georgia to Maine. Now, I didn't know what that meant. In my mind, reading hayfoot, strawfoot, I thought it was something like hayfoot, strawfoot, like that. I had no idea. And it wasn't until, I was talking to a book club about a year ago, and someone was like, I know what hayfoot, strawfoot was. And correct me if I'm wrong, I have no idea if this is the etymology of that, but they said the Confederate soldiers were simpletons, by and large, and when they signed up to join this effort against the Union, in order to teach them how to march, the instructors would put hay in one shoelaces and then straw up in the other shoelaces, and that's how and they knew the difference between hay and straw, and so they told them, hayfoot, strawfoot, hayfoot, strawfoot. Anyways, that's an aside, but can someone correct that? Does that sound legit? Yeah, okay. Still not certain of that, but nonetheless, moving along. Anyone in moderate physical condition can hayfoot, strawfoot from Georgia to Maine, and the trail is as wide as a Mack truck. There are blazes, so you'll never get lost. There's a 3-sided lean-to, a shelter within every day's hike. There's an abundance of food to be found along the Appalachian Trail. It turns out none of this was true. There were massive blowdowns. There were long stretches that were completely unblazed that Emma Gatewood, she was often getting lost. She couldn't find her way along the AT. And now you go out there and it's clear as day. Jennifer and I hiked this morning. By the way, you guys are very, very lucky. We took an Uber 11 miles to Boulder and to the Chautauqua set of trails. And Lord have mercy, climbed way up there and got winded and looked down upon Boulder, and it was just beautiful. But there's this organized, fantastic trail system. And even as marked as they were, we had a hard time a couple of times figuring out which way it was we wanted to go. Nonetheless, she had periods where there were no blazes on the trail. There's no real footpath. It's just a sort of stretch through the forest. And beyond that, she was completely unprepared. She carried with her not very many things. She had no tent. She had no sleeping bag. She had no maps to speak of. She had no compass. What she did have, she tucked inside a denim drawstring sack, which you see right here, that she made herself back home in Gallia County, Gal Police. She brought along an army blanket. Yeah, makes sense. She brought along a shower curtain to keep the rain off. She brought along a tin that included some Band-Aids and some bobby pins. She brought some Vicks salve. She brought some powdered milk and some raisins and peanuts and some bouillon cubes to suck on as she walked for the sodium. She hilariously brought along a gingham dress that she could shake out in the event she had to walk through town, because she was a farm-reared woman, but she was genteel nonetheless, and she didn't want to give anybody the appearance that she was a tramp. And so often, she would be headed into town, and she would sneak off into the woods, change into her denim drawstring, into her gingham dress, and walk through town as though she were just passing through, prim and proper, and then duck off into the woods on the other side of town and get back into her outfit, which was, the shirt you see there and some men's dungarees typically. Now, 55 was, if you've read the book, don't answer this, but 55 was an interesting year in terms of weather patterns. Anybody who hasn't read the book remember what happened in 55? That a couple of hurricanes. Yeah, Connie and Diane made landfall back to back off the coast of North Carolina, and they basically took the exact same path right up the East Coast, and they dumped torrential rain on New York and New England. Rain that the floods killed 211 people, the most rainfall in that period of time on record. And these hurricanes were the most expensive storms on record, cost $1 billion in 1955. And this was incredible. Well, Emma Gatewood is out on the trail with her shower curtain, trying to get along. There's no indication anywhere in her journals that she knew she was walking through a hurricane. She would write things like, very windy today, almost got blown off a mountain. She would write, slogged 9 miles through water today, all my stuff is wet, things like that. And then on top of that, there would be pictures, stories about her and pictures of her in the newspaper. It's hilarious, the juxtaposition of these above-the-fold 1A headlines would say, most costly storm on record, 211 dead, body count expected to rise. And then below the fold, it would be Grandma Gatewood on the Appalachian Trail. Granny tries to hike the AT, but no indication that she knew what it was she was hiking through. And she had some fascinating experiences, adventures, if you will, during those storms. At one point, she had slept the night before with a couple of boys who were on leave from the Navy. And she got up earlier than they did and took off down the road. And she came to Clarendon Gorge. Has anybody ever been to Clarendon Gorge? It's in New England. It's this big, expansive gorge, and and at this point it was a flood stage. And the rain was so heavy, the floods were so strong that they had washed out the footbridge that connected one side of the AT to the other. Well, Grandma Gatewood comes up to this gorge, and she realizes she can't make it across, and so she decides she's going to sit down and wait on these boys who came out of the Navy. Maybe they could help her across. Well, they come along a short time later, and sure enough, they find it at flood stage as well, and they walk upstream and downstream, and they can't figure out a way to cross. And they decide, in all of their 19-year-old knowledge, that they're going to tie this 5'2", 150-pound woman between them with parachute cord, and they're all going to try to ford this flooded stream together. And Emma Gatewood writes that it was so scary to her, and the water came up to her neck, she had to just tilt her head back and look to the sky. Well, they make it across, baby step by baby step. Everything works out, and she gets across, and she says, "Well, boys, you got Grandma across," and she takes off. She grabs her pack and takes off. Now, I tracked those guys down. Both of them were still alive when I started reporting this book. One of them lived in Sarasota, Florida, just south of me in Tampa, and his name was Robert Sargent. And I called him up out of the blue, and I said, "I'm writing a book about Emma Gatewood, and I'm wondering, do you have memory of this?" And I read the passage from her journal about this crossing. I said, "Do you remember this?" And he said, "Ben," he's in his 80s now. He said, "I can't forget it. I still have nightmares about crossing that creek." There's another time, a short time later, in the Green Mountains of Vermont, she comes upon a lean-to that is occupied, as she writes in her journal, by 8 colored boys, and they're 2 white leaders from a Catholic parish in Harlem. And she says the boys are a little rambunctious, but they're very nice. They share their corn pone with her. She eats a little bit. She says she felt bad because they were picking the unripe apples out of the trees and throwing them at each other. Nonetheless, they invited her to stay the night, and she realized this little shelter, this little lean-to, was a little too full with 10 people in it. She would have made 11, and she decided to hike on up the trail to see if she could make it to the next lean-to so she could have a good night's sleep with less of a crowd. She hikes a few miles down the path and comes upon another swollen stream that she doesn't feel safe crossing, and decides to return to this lean-to that's occupied by the Catholic youths from Harlem. And when she gets back there, they accept her, give her a place to sleep. She said she had trouble falling asleep because she's curled up in a corner, and one of the African-American boys kept putting his arm over her. And remember, this is 1955. This is a year after Brown versus Board of Education, months before Rosa Parks gives up her seat on the bus. There's racial tension all through the South and up the Appalachian chain. Picture this genteel white farmer woman having trouble going to sleep because this young man keeps putting his arm over her, and he'll move it back, she'll move it back, and he'll put it back over, and so this goes on all night. They get up the next morning, hike together to that swollen stream, and she rides across the stream on one of these strong boys' backs and makes it across and then disappears out of sight, says thank you and disappears out of sight. I tracked down the rest of that story, and as it turns out, one of those, the white Catholic leaders, wrote about this before his death and recounted this experience. And he said 1955 in Harlem was an incredibly violent summer. The gangs, the street gangs, were fighting over every square inch of territory, and it was super hot. And this added to the tension in that area, in that period. These guys could probably speak to that, 1955 in Harlem. And it was intense. So it got so bad, the bloodshed was so bad that the head of that parish in Harlem identified these 2 white seminarians and said, identify the 4 head honchos from these 2 rival gangs and take them on an all-expense-paid trip to the Green Mountains of Vermont to try to broker the peace. So these were the Catholic boys that Emma came into contact with that night. They weren't actually Catholic boys. They were the 4 head honchos of these 2 rival gangs who had been fighting in street warfare in Harlem. Nonetheless, when she finished, just to advance a little bit, when she finished her hike, she dropped a note to one of those white leaders in Harlem saying, "Hey, tell those boys I owe them my life, and anytime they're in southeastern Ohio, come visit me, drop in on me, and everything will be cool." Now she was, skip forward a little bit, she was totally unprepared. and one of the big things was she had no food. Besides some peanuts and some raisins here and there. And so she often had to rely on the kindness of strangers. And this is an interesting time in American history, especially in the South. Not everybody was trusted by the people who lived in the hollows along the Appalachian chain in the South. This was a period of time in which there were revenuers versus moonshiners. There's a lot of moonshine being made in the South, in the Appalachians. And so she was often doubted by people from whom she sought shelter, including one man who said, "Did Washington send you?" And she said, "No, I'm Grandma Gatewood. I'm hiking the Appalachian Trail." And he was like, "What is the Appalachian Trail?" He had no idea that it ran through his backyard. And so she tried to prove herself. She tried to show him her Social Security card and some pictures of her grandchildren that she had brought along, and he still would have none of it. He said, "No, you're not staying with me. I don't trust you at all." And he made her move along. But many people that she met along the AT, they were kind to her. They would let her in, including this family here, these young boys who lived in Orford, New Hampshire. Their family actually still has a hostel on the AT. They still take people in, which is interesting. Their father was the governor of New Hampshire for several terms. And so, but the Peter, who is the young man standing right here, Peter is still alive. The other two are gone. But Peter remembered, tracked him down. He remembered one day he's a boy at this age, and there's a knock at the door, and his mother goes to answer the door. She's cooking supper. She goes to answer the door, opens the door, and there stands Emma Gatewood, who walks right past Peter's mother and says, "I'm Grandma Gatewood, what's for dinner?" And walks right to the dining room table and sits down. And of course they served her, and because that's how it happened. Now, she had dropped the postcard in the mail back to her kids in Ohio because she'd been discovered by the newspaper. She'd been found by a couple of, a reporter and a photographer who were both members of the Trail Club around Roanoke, Virginia. And they had heard through the grapevine that there was this 5'2", 150-pound woman who was 67 years old, trying to walk the Appalachian Trail. And so they were on the lookout for her, and they staked out the trail, and here she finally came. And at first she was reluctant to tell her story. She didn't want any attention because she thought somebody might try to stop her. And so they had to steal her backpack, and they took it to their trail cabin owned by the Trail Club. She finally arrived there, and then they wouldn't let her go to sleep until she shared her story. So this is why she alerted her children. But from that point on, the word of this little old woman hiking the Appalachian Trail spread like prairie fire. And every town that she walked through after this, after Roanoke, Virginia, there was somebody waiting for her to say, ask her questions, to get her story and share with the readers. And the attention got so intense near the end of the trail that the Associated Press and United Press International were doing daily dispatches to papers across the country about her progress. And they were often accompanied by headlines like, "Will Granny make it?" Was a certain tension. So she captured the attention of greater America. And every reporter asked her, "Why are you doing this?" Every single one of them. "Why are you doing this?" And this woman who was a teetotaler, turned up her nose at coffee, never cursed, never smoked a cigarette. Her kids told me that she had this book of home remedies that included like how to get rid of head lice, how to make a concoction to get paint off the door frame, all of the things. She had ripped out the page about how to make wine, how to ferment grapes to make wine. This is the kind of person she was. This woman, she lied to all these reporters through her teeth. She told them a million different things. I wanted to see what was over the hill. And then I wanted to see what was over the next one, so I just kept walking. She told some, I didn't have anything better to do. She told some, I'm doing it on a lark. And 1955, by the way, the trail had been opened in the late 30s. The first person to thru-hike the trail, Earl Schaefer, did so in 1949. And when he did it, nobody believed him because the founders of the AT never thought anybody would ever be able to walk the whole thing at once. And so when Earl did it in 1949, he had to prove to the ATC, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, that he actually did it by sending them his slides and his journal entries to say, no, I actually walked from one end to the other all the way. So in 55, when Emma did it, only about 6 men had done it at that point. Some of their hikes have been called into question in modern times. But this was very little known that you could actually walk from one end to the other until she started to do it. So when she lied to these reporters, and on top of that, she told them all that she was a widow, when the fact was her husband, P.C. Gatewood, was alive and well back home in Gallia County, Ohio. She had met P.C. when she was about 18 years old. He was 10 years her senior. He was a catch. He was a school teacher. He had some money, came from a family with some wealth. This is 1918, so it didn't take much. But she never necessarily fell in love with him. He said, if you don't marry me, I'm going to leave town. And she realized this might be a way out of her own impoverished situation, and so she agreed to marry him. And it was a bad move. From the very beginning, he started beating her. And over the next 3 decades, for 30 years, she was married to this oppressive, hard-fisted man in this small town where everybody minded their own business or knew how to keep secrets. He also had an insatiable sexual appetite. She would often take refuge in the beds of her daughters so that he would leave her alone. Their fights progressively got worse and worse and worse. And it wasn't, as domestic situations are, it had some nuance to it. There was a cousin who recalled for me that he witnessed one of their altercations, and he recalls Emma running out of the back door of their house, and she is being chased by PC. But she runs out of the back door of the house and climbs up into this covered wagon full of corn and is sort of hiding out in there. And PC comes out of the house after her, and he grabs a hoe off the back of the porch, and he's going at her. And one of PC's farmhands grabs him and wraps him up and says, "You better put that hoe down, you're gonna kill her." And Emma shouted from the back of the wagon, "You leave him alone, this is our fight." She was a tough cookie. This went on and on and on, and she left a couple of times. It got so severe, the beatings did, that twice she left home and made her way to California, where some of her family had migrated, and she would stay there for several weeks, and PC would write her letters, convincing her to come back, and both times she came back. And the second time she came back, a short while later, she took a beating where she thought she was going to die. He broke her teeth out, he busted a rib, he pulled part of her ear off, and she realized then that she couldn't stay in this marriage, that she was going to die if she stayed with him. And as rare as it was, in 1941, she filed for divorce and left for good. And she got the farm. She was entitled to some alimony, although there's nothing on the record that ever suggested that he paid her any money. She got their remaining 3 or 4 children up and out of the house. And this is when she started walking, which is an interesting thing. She found a certain refuge in the woods, and often if you talk to the people who knew her, who knew them, they remember that when she would run from him, she would seek refuge in the woods, and she would often stay for a long period of time hiding out in the woods. And that's the first indication to me as I started to research this story, that this is when she started to feel something about being outdoors, a certain level of peace, a certain level of passion about being in the woods. And it's right around this time when some of her neighbors start reporting that she would go off into the woods and test herself sort of in nature, stay overnight, stay 2 nights. Now, she never drove a car. It was completely rare for people, of this generation to drive. So if she wanted to visit a friend, she would walk 13 or 14 miles. It was nothing for her. And so she was good on her feet, although it wasn't a thing for her at that point in time. Let me pause right here to say 55 was an interesting year in American history, primarily because of the massive development of the interstate highway system. It was super interesting to learn about this as I reported the book. But starting with this, in 1950, 8% of American households had television sets. By the end of that decade, that number was 80%. Someone said Americans have gone from living life by the soles of their feet to living life by the seat of their pants. And the interstate highway system was in full swing. Millions and millions of dollars were being pumped into paving concrete lanes. Car sales were booming. There were advertisements in the national magazines. Don't leave your wife stranded on your suburban island. Buy her own car. So this was finally an idea. And sure enough, Americans were buying cars in great numbers. So all of this is happening as she makes her walk in 55. The summer of 55, when she's out there on the Appalachian Trail, 2 emissaries from the sports world address a big gathering of family doctors and pediatricians in Los Angeles. And it was the head coach for UCLA and the men's Olympic athletic coach. And they delivered this keynote address, and they said, for the very first time, the kids who are coming into our program, we have to build muscle instead of stretch muscle. And they pointed directly to the automobile. They said, this is the problem. Kids would rather hop in a car and ride 2 blocks than they would, go 2 blocks on their own 2 feet. So you see this massive, just in that generation, this massive decline in people getting around on foot. I feel like now we're starting to correct that, maybe in a little, in slight ways. It's so encouraging to hear that there are more trails, more miles of trails than automobile roads in Broomfield. So all this is happening in this time, and there's Emma Gatewood hiking the Appalachian Trail. That was a few years later there, but I love that photograph. Near the end of the trail, she was having a hard time. She had been beaten down. She sprained a knee. 1 lens had been broken out of her glasses, and she was blind without her glasses. As she's going through Maine, the temperatures are falling below freezing each night. She's having a hard time getting by. The headlines in the papers are, will Granny make it? There's a lot of tension out there. Americans are hanging on this story. And she is profiled in Sports Illustrated magazine, which at that point was a year old. It's founded in 1954. This is 1955. And the interesting thing in this profile, a young reporter named Mary Snow, strangely enough, female reporter for Sports Illustrated in 1955. It's fascinating. I want to do a book about her. She finds Emma on the trail, and Emma is just incredibly critical of the Appalachian Trail. She said it's nothing like the National Geographic story said it was. She said an Indian would laugh at this trail. It goes up every highest mountain and down every lowest valley. There are no views. There are blowdowns all along the way. There are long stretches where there are no blazes. I mean, she is just critical of this trail, and it embarrasses the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. They don't know what to make of this because they've invested all this time and money into trying to maintain the trail. So they're embarrassed by this. Nonetheless, Emma keeps on. She wakes in the morning of September 25th, 1955, on a bum knee before sunup, and starts her ascent up Mount Katahdin in the darkness all by herself. And has anybody in here climbed Mount Katahdin? Awesome. Is it easy? No. It's not easy. I think Jennifer can testify to that too, because she sprained an ankle on the way up, and but we both made it up to Baxter Peak. Difficult climb. There's a part where the boulders are such that somebody has driven rebar into these boulders, so you have to use, they call them monkey bars. You have to use the rebar to actually pull your body weight up and over these boulders. Not an easy task. Nonetheless, she had made it that far, and she ascended Mount Katahdin in the sleet and stood on the top of Baxter Peak, finishing 2,050 miles of the Appalachian Trail, the first woman to do so. And she sang the first verse of America the Beautiful. And she said, I said I'd do it and I've done it. And she turned around and walked back down. She was greeted by a gaggle of reporters who all described her in a variety of ways. Robust, hardy, tired, worn out, exhausted. One said, she's ready to do the trail again. Another said she'll never do the trail again. But she was something of a celebrity. Her story ran in papers across the country and Sports Illustrated magazine. And then she went back home to Gallia County and sort of lost the notoriety. And 2 years later, 1957, she's bored and she decided she would do it again. She took basically the same kind of gear, shower curtain, blanket, gingham dress, and she set off again. This time was much better. She had met friends along the way and she corresponded with them in the intervening years, so they knew what to expect her. And here she came, this time at 69 years old in 1957, walking along the AT again. People were looking out for her this time. She had some interesting experiences that second trip. Once she stopped to take a nap on a log that was stretched over the Appalachian Trail, and it was a beautiful day. And she woke to the sound of some small thing coming, rustling through the leaves, coming down the trail at her. It was a fox. She saw the fox, and she didn't move. And the fox is coming right down the AT, and it has some little prey in its mouth. And as soon as it gets a few yards from her, she says, "Well, you brought me my dinner, didn't you?" And she said that fox dropped the prey and darted off into the woods. There was another time she, again, stopped in the forest to take a nap. She was really enjoying herself. She fell asleep on a bed of leaves. And when she woke, there were 3 buzzards that had come down and were sitting shoulder to shoulder beside her. And she turned to them and she said, "Well, I'm not dead yet." And they all took off. She had a good time on the second trip. Outside of being bit by a dog, one harrowing experience, and then being bit by some kind of a bug where she was laid up for a day, and she took penicillin for the very first time and overcame the swelling in her leg. She finished the second trip up the Appalachian Trail in the fall of 1957, becoming the first person to do the trail in one fell swoop twice, which was a record that she held for years and years. 1969, she read in the newspaper that there was a wagon train leaving Independence, Missouri, bound for Portland, Oregon, and to celebrate the centennial of the state of Oregon. And she thought to herself, well, I got nothing better to do. And so she set off, made it to Independence, and took off down the road, recreating the Oregon Trail, which ran about 2,000 miles from Independence, Missouri to Portland, Oregon. She caught that wagon train within about 2 weeks and left it in her dust. And this was a hike she didn't enjoy at all. It was a lot of walking down the shoulder of the highway. She wrote that anytime a big truck passed, it would pull her umbrella out of her hands. She didn't carry that same pack. She carried an umbrella. That's her actually along the Oregon Trail. So these trucks would drive past and pull her umbrella out. She often was mistaken for a tramp. She looks pretty clean there, but I think we doctored that up a little bit. But she was often mistaken for a tramp. One time, I could never confirm this story, so it's not included in the book, but my mother told me this story. One time she came into a roadside motel, and the proprietor of this motel thought she was a hobo. And Emma said, well, I'm Grandma Gatewood. You haven't heard of me? And the guy was like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And she said, well, I'll prove it to you. And she had been given a certificate from the governor of Oregon, making her an official ambassador at large for the Oregon Centennial. And she said, I'll get this. And she goes down to get in her bag. Again, I don't know if this is true, but it makes for a good story. As she bends over to get in her bag, marbles spill out of her pocket and roll across the linoleum. And she straightens up and looks that proprietor in the eye, and she says, I guess I've lost my marbles. She gets down to Oregon near the end of the 2,000-mile Oregon Trail. And at this point, she is 71 years old. And she is incredibly frustrated, primarily by the attention she's been getting, because people see her. They read about her in the newspaper, and they see her walking along the highway, and so they'll pull off, and they want an autograph, or they want to ask her some questions, or they want to make a picture with her and her and their kids. And she said, I don't mind talking to people, but when I stop, it takes me a long time to get started again. So this was physically challenging at the age of 71. And so as her frustration manifests itself, she's walking down the road, and this young photographer for a newspaper in Oregon jumps out of the bushes and starts taking her picture. And as she walks by him, she just rears back with her umbrella and whacks him in the head. And then, of course, she starts weeping and apologizing all over herself. So, I'm so sorry. She's really kind of coming unwound at this moment. So I'm so sorry. And somebody brings her a lawn chair to sit on and a glass of milk and a hamburger, and she calms down and again is just apologetic to this young guy. He's just doing his job. And the photograph that ran in papers across the country the next day was this young photographer with his arm around Grandma Gatewood, who has her head down in shame like this, and he has this giant knot on his forehead where she's whacked him with the umbrella. She arrived in Portland, Oregon, and was greeted by 5,000 people celebrating the Centennial of Oregon. They treated her like a queen. She was taken up in a helicopter. She was served roast beef with the mayor. She was given a new dress and a new purse. They actually took her clothes, and I could never confirm this, but somebody told me that they're actually in the possession of the Portland Historical Museum, this outfit that you see her wearing here. They outfitted her, though, and they put her up in the Benton Motel, and they took her on a yacht ride on the coast, and they took her climbing up Mount Hood. They actually gave her, all this stuff had been taken from her, what she's wearing here, so they gave her the proper hiking gear, hiking boots, and a rain suit, and all the modern clothes in 69, and 59 was the year. And she hiked about halfway up the trail up Mount Hood and decided, this is uncomfortable. I don't like any of this stuff. Because she often hiked in Keds or Chuck Taylors. Anything she could find really, but mostly like canvas Keds, tennis shoes. The first hike on the AT in 1955, she wore through 7 pairs of tennis shoes. So all the modern hiking gear that they had equipped her with, she was like, no, I'm not having any of this. And she just turned around and walked back down. She stitched together a third complete hike of the Appalachian Trail by 1964, becoming the first person to ever do the trail 3 times. And that was an accomplishment that was a record that wouldn't be broken for quite a few years. Some other experiences that didn't make the book, which many of you have read it, but I'll share these. I didn't learn them until afterwards. She had a great trip down to Florida. My wife and I are from Oklahoma. We now live in Florida, so this is especially fond to me. She comes to visit her nephew who's stationed in Pensacola with the Navy, and they take Aunt Emma to an all-you-can-eat seafood place. And he said he and his wife went up to the buffet, and Emma's behind them, and they loaded their plates with peel and eat shrimp. And they get back to the table, and they all put their heads down, and he said he and his wife were just digging into the peel and eat shrimp, and they were discarding the shells and the tails in a little bowl in front of them. And he said, when I looked up, when I was finished, Emma had cleaned her plate. There wasn't a shell or a tail anywhere in sight. And he said, why, Aunt Emma, we normally discard the shells and the tails. And she said, why, we paid for them, didn't we? ever the frugal woman. The same nephew told me that she slept in their guest room, which was upstairs in a 2-story house, and it overlooked this big, beautiful city park with miles of hiking trails, and it was only about 2 blocks away, but you could see it from the window. And he had to go to work one day, and his wife had to go to work, and Emma was going to be there alone. And she says, well, what am I going to do all by myself? Y'all are gone. And her nephew said, well, why don't you go take a hike in the city park? It's just a couple of blocks up there. And Emma said, well, that's too far away. Late in life, P.C. Gatewood was on his deathbed, and he had one dying wish, and he told his son Nelson, relate it to me. He said, go get your mother. I don't want to talk to her. She doesn't have to talk to me. Just go get her and have her grace my doorway. And at that point, Emma Gatewood had put in 14,000 miles on foot, starting at the age of 67. 14,000 recorded miles, not including trips here and there. Those were steps that she refused to take. She would not give him the pleasure of seeing her one last time, which I think is pretty cool. I don't know. She came home one day. Does anybody have their book with them, by the way? Can I just steal a? God bless you. Thank you. She worked right up until the very end, and this is an example of one of her diary entries from 1967. She'd die about 6 years later, but so she was born at, somebody do the math, she's born in 1898, and this is 1967. What does that make? 69. I took a mattock and shovel and worked the road around the court. She owned a trailer court. Dug a ditch and let the water out, and dug the high places into little holes. Lifted the grass where around the well was dug, and wheeled 5 loads of dirt and filled it in. Then put the sod back and watered it and beat it down with the shovel. Put the block of walk back in place, spaded and planted 2 hills of cukes, 2 of pumpkins, 4 of peanuts. Put a fence around to keep the rabbits out. Burned the trash, got some asparagus down the track and picked lettuce and a few strawberries. Went to the post office, fixed the underpinning on the trailer, and now I'm tired. Sounds like quite a day. She worked right up until the very end. She also enjoyed herself. She took a trip on a paddle wheel up the Mississippi. Greyhound gave her, because of her celebrity, a open-ended ticket. She wanted to visit all 48 states. In 1973, she came out of Florida, and she told her son it was the first time she'd ever been on a Greyhound bus that was air-conditioned, 73. And she blamed that for the uneasiness she felt when she got back home. She called Nelson and said, I'm sick, something's wrong. It was the only time he ever remembered her being ill, and he immediately called and dispatched an ambulance to her house. And sure enough, she fell into a coma a short time later and died shortly after that. Her kids told me that just before her death, they very clearly heard her humming the bars of the Battle Hymn of the Republic. Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. So I am proud to present this book. I'm so stoked and even surprised in a big way. This came out in April of 2014, so I'm stoked and surprised in such a big way that it's still making the rounds. Like still people are finding it and connecting with her story. An update on, so when I started reporting the book, 4 of her children were still alive. It's down to 3 now. Her youngest daughter, Lucy, is in a nursing home in Orlando, Florida, and has been there for over a year, right? So Lucy was the gatekeeper, or the flame keeper, I should say. She kept her mother's memory alive, kept all of her correspondence and her trail journals. And so when I came along with this idea to do a book about her, Lucy was like, "We've been waiting on you." So it's a real pleasure to be able to solidify in some way her legacy. You can still find all sorts of people, even before the book came out, you could find all sorts of people who are inspired by Emma Gatewood to through hike the Appalachian Trail. And I think that number has grown since the book has been out because I hear about it more and more. There was a woman who hiked not long ago. She just completed her through hike, but she was paraplegic. She didn't have the use of her legs, and she fixed up mechanical devices that would help her walk, essentially. And she finished a through hike the Appalachian Trail, and she was inspired by Grandma Gatewood, which is a very cool thing. When Jennifer and I crested Mount Katahdin in September of 2012, I think it was the same day that about 30 through hikers had finished, and so we gave them their chance to celebrate. It's a big deal, still, even though thousands and thousands of people do it each year, still a big deal. Gave them their chance to celebrate and have some beers and whatnot. And then I sort of sheepishly approached a couple of them, and I was like, "Hey, I'm doing a book about Grandma Gatewood," and I focused in on this one guy. I was like, "Do you know her?" And he was like, "Yeah, man." And I said, "Well, can you tell me, like, is she an inspiration to you? Did she, inspire you to do this?" And he says, "All I can say is, man, you sure gotta respect somebody who can hike the trail barefoot." And and I thought, her legacy has grown a little bit, It's not just that she was 67, 69, and 71. It was, she's now barefoot doing the Appalachian Trail. Anyhow, you still hear really cool stories about people being inspired to do the AT by Grandma Gatewood. But what touches me in a big way is the emails that I still get, people who came in contact with the book who say, "I have not so much as walked around the block in years. And you know what? Today I got off my ass and walked around the block." And that tickles me to death. So I'm proud of this, and I'm proud of the story. It's not. I don't think I had much to do with it. It told itself. But I'm glad it's out there, and I'm glad that Broomfield chose to read it together, because that's such a cool thing. And I'm happy to take your questions.
Let's give you a hand.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, she relied on people along the trail. There weren't McDonald's, but there were Howard Johnson's, and she popped into Hojo's every once in a while. Yeah. Beyond that, she had worked alongside the men on the farm for years and years, so she knew the song of every bird and the nutritiousness of every plant, including she often used plants for medicinal purposes. So she would eat ramps that she found along the trail. She would eat wild strawberries. She ate often something she called sorrel salad, which was, I once in a book talk referred to sorrel as a grass, and I got an angry email from a botanist a couple of days later saying sorrel is not a grass. It's not a grass, it's a plant, but it tastes like grass. But she called it sorrel salad. Just whatever she could get. She would find things left behind by other hikers sometimes. Once there was a porcupine that wouldn't leave her alone, and she killed it, and then she couldn't figure out how to dequill it. She was just going to roast it over a fire, but she couldn't figure out how to dequill it, and it was a lot of work, and so she just cut it open, and then she had her choice of organs, and she chose the liver. And so she put the liver on a spit and cooked it over the fire. And as she wrote, she couldn't get the taste out of her mouth for 4 days. She never ate porcupine again. So she got along, however she could. That was the first. The second trip, people expected her. She had, again, corresponded with folks she had met along the trail. So there were often people who knew she was coming, and they would have meals prepared for her and meals for her to take. Today, you would call that slack packing or, yeah. In the day, like trail, there's something called trail magic. People leave gifts out for others on the trail, and if you're through hiking, if you find something just when you need it, whether it's a drink of water or a piece of fried chicken, it's trail magic. Well, Emma made her own trail magic by knocking on doors and meeting people. I wrote a story so I'm a newspaper reporter at the Tampa Bay Times, and I wrote a story in 2011 that was about an unsolved lynching in North Florida. It's 5,000 people participated in this, in the 1934 murder and mutilation of a man. It's horrible, and nobody's ever been named publicly. And so I tried to name them, and it made the rounds and got a lot of attention, and wound up with a literary agent in New York who it's every writer's dream. She called and said, I don't think this is a book, but I love your style. Do you have any ideas in mind? And I didn't. And so for a couple of days, I was like, is that what's supposed to happen? I'm like, I remembered my mother telling me when I was growing up bedtime stories about her great aunt, Emma Gatewood, who was the first woman to solo through hike the Appalachian Trail. I knew very little more than that, but these crazy stories, again, that I never, like she told the one about the marbles spilling out of her pocket. I could never confirm that. She told a story about her somewhere in the Northwest scaring off a black bear with her umbrella. Like this black bear comes out of nowhere and Emma's like, go, get it. But it stuck with me, and I didn't know anything beyond that. All I knew is I have in my family tree somewhere the first woman to solo through hike the Appalachian Trail. And so I started doing some research very quickly and figured out, nobody has given her serious biographical treatment. And she wasn't just the first woman to solo through hike the Appalachian Trail, she was the first person to do it twice and 3 times. And I learned that that 4 of her 11 children were still alive. And I called Lucy just to see if there was material enough there. And Lucy was like, again, been waiting on your phone call for a long while. So I pitched it to Jane, and she said, yeah, this is going to be great. So that's how it happened. Thank goodness. She represented President Obama in his first 2 books. So this was this is a big, yeah, she's got an office she's got an office on Union Square in New York. This is a big deal, and I didn't want to disappoint, so Grandma Gatewood, yeah. She took $200 on that first through hike, so about $1 every, 10 miles? Is that right? I'm not a geologist. I'm so bad at math. I'm just a word guy. 10 cents a mile? Is that what it works out to? If it's 2,000 miles and $200? Yeah. Well, she didn't buy 7 pairs of shoes. She would often beg for shoes. One man she came to, he was mowing alongside a road, and he saw her, and he saw that her shoes were in bad shape, and he said, I think he went and drove into town and phoned his wife and said, bring her some sneakers. So she was, she inherited some and was gifted some, and then bought some others. And she, I go into this in the book, but she had terrible bunions. Her feet were not a pretty thing to look at. Her toes curved in about like that. And so often she would have to split the, if they didn't have the flexibility of canvas, if some man had given her some leather shoes or whatever, she'd often have to cut a little gash in the side so that her feet could, so she was more comfortable. Yeah. Yeah, so there were no photos from the first half almost, from Mount Oglethorpe until Roanoke, but there were a lot of news photographs after that. Virtually every town that she went through, she would, she'd be photographed. She was on the radio and there's even some news footage of her. So I found a lot of that stuff. Thank you so much. Great, great audience. Really appreciate it.